Hello and welcome once again to the Fair Game podcast, We Love You Football. I'm Graham Miller, and in this episode, that famous wristwatch of Sir Alex Ferguson appears to be bossing things again. We're in time added on, still waiting for the Football Governance Bill to be published and for the Premier League to reach a deal with the Football League to ease those football financial inequalities. So, to find out where we are, we're joined by two expert guests. First, David Bernstein, CBE, the former FA chairman, chair of Wembley Stadium, and when chairman of Manchester City in the late 1990s, it's fair to say he saved the club. Also with us is Niall Cooper, Fair Game's founder and CEO, who I'm pleased to say is recovering well after recent major surgery. And it's Niall to whom we turn first to bring us the very latest Fair Game news.
Thanks, Graham. It's great to be back. As you may know, I'm recovering still from a double heart bypass operation, which leaves me a little bit weak. But obviously for Fair Game doesn't mean things stop for us. And we're absolutely delighted to welcome a new Deputy CEO in Carrie Dunn, who hopefully you'll get to hear from and meet in the weeks ahead. On top of that, it's obviously really close now to finally getting that Football Governance Bill over the line. We've been expecting the legislation for weeks and weeks now, and we had thought it would actually be this Monday, but it could still be later on this week. So do watch this space. The Fair Game team have been in overdrive preparing for it, and we've been speaking to numerous politicians as well over the last few weeks. So hopefully that will mean that we will get a bill when it finally arrives that is fit for purpose and truly does deliver a fairer future for football, which we all want to see.
Niall, thank you. So let's get stuck into our conversation. David Bernstein, if we can begin with you. Now, football is at a significant crossroads. Decisions taken now will possibly shape the landscape of the game for generations to come. How frustrating are these delays?
Well, frankly, we waited so long that another day or so or week or so doesn't really make a huge amount of difference. And I think we all appreciate the government, to put it nicely, is under enormous pressure on a wider front at the moment. So I'm not too bothered whether the bill comes out today or next week, as long as it does come out. I'm much more concerned about the content of the bill rather than the timing. But perhaps you'll come back to that.
Yes, I will. I mean, you know how these sites operate. What's going on, do you think, behind the scenes?
Well, you never know what's going on behind the scenes. I think our information, best information, is that the bill, pretty much in line with Tracy Crouch's fan-led review, will cover certain areas of the governance changes that are required pretty well. But there's liable to be a hole in the centre of this, the whole area of financial controls and distribution of funds and so on, which is at the core of the need to see reform and different sort of governance in English football. I'm here in part because I put together a group called we call ourselves the Manifesto Group a few years ago, and I think we started the ball rolling to a fair extent in all this, and we did it because, as far as we could see, the English football is out of balance, it's out of phase, and the cut a make a complicated story as simple as possible. The Premier League, with all its wealth and power, has unbalanced the game. And a mix of the influence of the Premier League, the soft power of the Premier League, and the way the funds are distributed across football, plus other connected financial issues, are absolutely key if we're going to get the pyramid of English football into a healthier state. Our concern, which I think we will hear in a moment, is shared by Niall, is that the bill is likely to fall short in that particular area.
So what happens then?
Well, we'll see. We will do what we can, as I know Niall and others will, and I think a lot of Football League clubs are very unhappy about the situation as well. We will do what we can to see if we can get this get this bill changed. If this, in fact, is what transpires, we saw this in a way as low-hanging fruit for the government. There's a real desire among the wider footballing public to see change, and we believe that in a very difficult world, this was quite an easy win. But I think the government is in danger of extracting defeat from the jaws of victory in this, and I think there'll be quite a lot of disappointment and opposition to this bill from many in football, maybe from the opposition in Parliament, and so on. So I think there's quite a way to go. We'll have to see how things work. But of course, but until we see the bill, we don't actually know if what I'm saying is factual or not, but I suspect it is.
Niall, this desire for balance between commercial success, fair distribution of cash, the protection of football's grassroots, it's what fair game is all about. But from what David was saying there, do you fear the problems, perhaps they're just too big to resolve?
I don't think they are too big to resolve, Graham. I think there is a real possibility to actually deliver what football really needs. It's about having the bravery from our politicians to look at the wider picture of football and to see what football clubs really mean to communities and what they really are about. So, we're in a week where Rochdale and Torquay, their very existence is under threat. And we already know that there are protests happening at Derby, at Sheffield Wednesday. There's situations that have happened at Reading and so on. There are so many things going on there that show red flags to what's wrong with the current system. And when it does come down to it, ultimately, you can have fair regulation, but the problems with the football are about the financial distribution and about trying to change the culture of the game. And that really is something that this regulator has the opportunity to do so. Largely, when we looked at the original Tracy Crouch report and the review, and there was a lot that's to be celebrated about it. There's a lot of good things in there, but it does come down to really getting a grasp of that financial distribution. And our clubs have consistently said that without fair financial flow, then you're going to have a regulator without teeth, and the regulator needs to have that oversight. And that's the key. So when we look at the details of the bill, it will be about making sure, and I believe it's their number one objective, that you have financial sustainability throughout the football pyramid. If that's their number one objective, then clearly they need to have oversight over the financial flow. And our worry is that that might not be the case. And that's what we will be doing all our best to make sure that any final bill and final act includes that oversight.
So the new regulator may not be the knight in shining armour then. There's more to it than that.
That's the reality to it. And it's like, where has that dream come from? Where is that ideal and that ideology that has been espoused throughout the last few years? Where has it got weakened? And this is where it comes down to our politicians, our elected officials, the people that are supposed to be representing those communities, which a large swathe of them have EFL or National League clubs in them. These are people that should really be caring about that infrastructure and those clubs that are so key to those communities. It's up to them to make sure that this regulator, this once in a lifetime opportunity to change football for the better, actually comes to fruition and does deliver. Because at the moment, my fear, and I think David's fear, is that it could well fall short.
And Graham, I think one's got to understand that these so-called negotiations between the Premier League and the rest of football, but particularly the Football League, they're not really negotiations in the full sense of the word, because only one party has got the power. I've used the simile of Russia negotiating with Ukraine having no help from anywhere else. It's not it's not a negotiation anywhere near equals. And the Football League are sort of supplicants, in a way, to the Premier League. So it needs this statutorily backed regulator to be involved in this negotiation, not as some fallback position. If they can't agree, the regulator, they may well agree something which actually is almost forced upon the Football League because of the strength of the Premier League. And it's this power that the Premier League's got, and which it uses very efficiently. And I don't blame the Premier League for a moment. They do what they do. They've got their own business to run. But their strength, their power, their financial muscle, which, by the way, not only outmuscles the Football League, but outmuscles the FA as well. The FA can't compete in power with the Premier League, and I was chairman of the FA, and I saw firsthand how difficult it is for the Football Association. When the Premier League holds most of the cards.
Did you try to move things along when you were at the FA?
I tried to move a lot of things along. I was successful in some. The area that I was least successful in was governance, because I was very keen to make some radical reform at the FA to make the FA a more credible governing body, in which case it's possible the regulator will never be necessary. Because really, an independent, well-financed, properly run football association should be doing this job, but it can't do it. And that's been shown time and time again over decades. So, hence this fallback position, if you like, that we need something which is government-supported, statutorily backed regulator.
To a simple fan like me, it is extraordinary that the group who oversees football, the Football Association, simply doesn't have the power we all assumed it did have.
Well, as I say, it's been very, very slow to reform itself. The FA Council, for example, which is the sort of parliament of football. But these days, the word parliament is a little bit tarnished, isn't it? What we've seen in the last few days. But the parliament of football, has changed a little now, but is still unrepresentative of the country. And the way the board is comprised, again, we made some progress. I managed to get non-exec directors, onto the board. I managed to get the first woman appointed to the FA board, but it's all playing around the edges. It needs more fundamental change to give it a credibility. It's a bit like that old scenario about when Stalin was told that the Pope didn't approve of what he was doing in Eastern Europe. Stalin retorted, "How many divisions does the Pope have?" And that's a little bit like this. The Premier League's got all the divisions.
No, the Premier League, obviously, it's the richest league in the world, and they would argue that there's a massive rise in costs and liabilities for them to find, and only future revenues will cover that. And that's why they'll want to keep as much of the cash as they can, and that will never change.
I've got issues with that, Graham, because I think when you look at the difference between what the Premier League earns and what the next nearest international league, I mean, it's 2 or 3 times. So, there is an awful lot of extra money. And then when you talk about the ecosystem and the strength of the pyramid and how that strengthens our national game, if more money actually goes down to the lower ends of the pyramid and it's distributed in the correct way, so you see investment into infrastructure, into communities, into academies, what that does is actually gets more people into our stadia, more people caring about our national game, more talent coming through. All of that benefits the national game overall, which ultimately benefits the Premier League. That can only be good. And I also think that if we start seeing proper regulation, then the whole load of all swathe of organisations that won't touch football with a barge pole because of its poor reputation will start being attracted to actually want to invest and look into football. That's where I can see the real big benefit. So it's this kind of naivety to think about just the Premier League. Football is bigger than the Premier League. Football is about so many amazing things that happen on a grassroots level that we should really be addressing. And when I say grassroots, I basically nowadays mean anything that's from the Championship lower, because the divide is so massive. And we really need to look at addressing that, because I think that just helps the game overall. And I'm sure David, from his experience with the FA, having dealt with a number of those different people, can see, the benefit that you could have if there was more money at those different levels, because I think it would be so much more healthy for our game overall.
We either believe in the pyramid of English football or we don't. We keep talking about the wonderful pyramid of English football with a large base of the national game and the low divisions and so on. And I think it is a wonderful structure. But if we really believe in it, then we just can't have the total focus and almost the greed of the Premier League dominating all this. We need proper forms of distribution with proper controls, by the way, over how that money is spent. We don't want to sort of encourage speculation. Additional money is to lead to additional speculation, but with responsible governance, we need that base of the pyramid. The pyramid doesn't stand up if the base isn't strong, and that's the problem we have here. We have a pyramid with a very shaky base, and I think if things don't improve, Niall's information and so on is we're going to see more and more clubs in serious trouble. And we saw with Bury alone the heartbreak that brings to not just people directly associated with the club, but with the whole area, with the town. It's a very sad thing when a football club collapses. There's a number of those around the corner if we're not careful.
You've both said you haven't seen the details, but I saw a report this morning suggesting that the National League clubs have, and they've apparently are demanding the government for more delays before the bill is published because of what they see as a possible tax that would force them, along with all other clubs, to pay legal costs if a club challenges the regulator. And of course, that's money the clubs lower down the divisions can't afford. Now, if that is the case, they do have a point, don't they?
I think when it comes to the National League clubs, they've not been involved in this conversation properly. So, when you talk about the deal is always between the Premier League and the EFL. The National League clubs don't really get a say. And when you think about that on an average weekend, the amount of people who watch a National League game is the same as the amount of people that might go and watch Chelsea. So, that is a significant number of people that are watching football at that level, and they're not in the conversation. So I think that's really where there's a fundamental gap. And I think the other bit that we talked about there, and the National League have indicated, is there is a need to make sure that the amount of burden that the governance introduces is dealt with properly. Because for a club like West Ham United, the burden of the extra governance is probably not huge. But for a club like Accrington Stanley or Tunbridge Angels, where your full-time staff is 4 or less, then actually having to dedicate a day a week to dealing with the new governance stuff is a huge impact on those clubs. So that needs to be taken on board. And, I've had conversations really recently raising that point quite significantly. And we are hopefully going to see some guarantees that there will be legal provision and support for those clubs to make sure they don't suffer. And I think that has to be really fundamental to it, because the need for a regulator is huge, but it also needs to make sure that we don't, by having introduced it, see more clubs collapse because of the extra burden that comes with it. And I think there is a need and understanding that has to be the case. What we're looking at is potentially a license fee that is paid, and that needs to be proportionate to how much clubs can pay. I would argue for a proportion of revenue, so that a Manchester City, who earns billions, will be able to help subsidise a lot of the clubs. And the clubs, if it was a percentage, then a club like Tunbridge Angels would see a very small amount, but they would get the support that comes with it. So, actually, in effect, they have extra resources to deal with it.
How much influence do you and others have, David, to make these crucial changes once the bill is published?
Well, I'm not sure. Unless we can get a real head of steam and get various disgruntled parties together and get some real media support for this, and to get MPs of both parties on side. If we do all that, then maybe there's a chance. At the end, it's going to be decided in Parliament. So in the end, we need members of Parliament from both parties, all parties, to be on side with this. That could make a difference.
Is this the last chance? Once this has been published, is there any way back, do you think, if it doesn't?
No, I think this will be the last chance. It's taken donkey's years to get to this stage. It's a real opportunity that's being created now. The principle of the regulator has been accepted. So that's a huge step. We mustn't downplay that. But yes, I think this is a real moment of truth. If we miss this chance now, then I think you can forget about this for many, many years to come.
I sadly totally agree with David. I think it is. And that's why I think the politicians have such an important role to play here. What's interesting is that the regulator itself, the appointment of the chair of the regulator will be a political one. So it depends about which party comes through, and the appointment of the directors of the regulator will also be political. So that for me is where it is absolutely fundamental that the three things that happen, that we get a bill that has that power to properly oversee football, finances in football, and that we get a good chair and a good set of directors, because that's the key to shaping it for the future generations. Because if we get that wrong, then we're stuck with it. And that's the real fear that I have. One of the key things that David and I have been discussing recently is that at the moment, what we're hearing is that if a deal is put forward, the regulator will not have any chance to rectify that or look at it and see whether it's fair or not once it comes into play. So it's no surprise the Premier League are pushing for a multi-year deal, 6 years or more, because ultimately the regulator won't be able to do anything. So it will have a reputation after 6 years of being pretty toothless. So that's why it needs to come into play now.
But if at the meeting this week, or indeed I understand there's another meeting in March between the Premier League and the Football League, if they sort it out amongst themselves, what's the point of the regulator then? I mean, it's a meaningless position.
Well, that comes back to what I said earlier. I wouldn't necessarily have confidence in a deal, but the deal that the two come to is an interest necessarily of the Football League. I think they could be pushed in. Maybe I hope not. I hope that their management and the clubs are strong enough to stand, particularly at the moment, with the prospect of a regulator around the corner. Now's the best opportunity they'll have to stand up for themselves to negotiate the best possible deal.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because if you look at the other regulators that we currently have in force, they don't have a very good press, do they? I mean, it's not a good thing to have a regulator currently. I mean, are we asking too much of this regulator? Who would you put there, David, if you had a free choice?
I haven't thought about who the best candidates might be. I don't know.
It would have to be a very strong legal figure, a person who has the power and the charisma to stand up to the Premier League and to make sure that they are dedicated towards proper oversight of football. That will take somebody who will be, I mean, there will be a lot of PR, a lot of press against them. Everything will be scrutinized. And it's about making sure they have that legal rigor to be able to really stand up and make sure that they can really deliver what we need for football. So there are, I've heard talk about senior QCs and people like that might be interested in that sort of stuff. I think it will be that sort of figure. And then again, it comes back to how key those directors are to make sure that they ensure that the regulator itself stands up to the objectives that it's been set out to do, which is, as we said at the start, to deliver a financial sustainable football pyramid. That's where we need to always come back to. And that's why I think it's a really important appointment. It's going to be so crucial.
So is the delay possibly a good thing, giving more people a chance to try and sort things out behind the scenes, David?
Yeah, but it's we're focusing understandably on this financial aspect because that's the core potential shortfall in this. But I want to give you another example on the governance front. So at the time of COVID, the National League were provided with some funding by the government through Sport England and so on to help them over the problems of COVID with people not being able to attend matches and so on. There was a huge dispute within the National League about how those money should be distributed. I was asked by the board of the National League and the chairman, Brian Barwick, if I would conduct an independent review of the way the money had been distributed, which I did. I produced a very quick report, and actually a very cogent and readable report on the subject. It transpired that the governance of the National League was a disgrace, a complete disgrace. Monies were being distributed in a unsuitable manner, and frankly, I have to say this publicly because I said it before. The clubs with directors on the board seem to do particularly well out of this. So the whole area of vested interests and governance and so on came into play. Now, this is not the very top end of football, it's the National League, but the National League is a very important league to many clubs who struggled greatly. I mean, their incomes are minuscule. So this was really important for them. And you can, there's plenty of evidence about this. I sent out a letter at the end to all the National League clubs because the report that I produced wasn't distributed to the clubs by the league. So I wrote to the clubs directly. So here's just an example, away from the Premier League and away from the biggest that we're talking about, of governance just not working for the same type of reason: vested interest prevailing, lack of proper governance.
What was the feedback then from the clubs after you wrote to them? What did they come back and tell you?
Well, it varied. Some clubs were absolutely apoplectic about it. There was threats of legal action against them. But anyway, I think it all died away in the end. And I don't believe the funds were redistributed or anything. And I think in the end, the whole thing was a bit of an abortion and was dealt with unequitably.
Mm. I think this is the point that David's making about the wider problem within football is this vested interest, and that needs to be taken out of it. So this is when you're looking at a financial distribution or a financial flow within football. The best people to do that are not the football clubs themselves necessarily, or the football administrators themselves, because they're obviously naturally, as businesses, going to be looking at how do we actually get the best deal for my club. And what you need to do is actually, for a moment, take yourselves out of that and think about what's actually best for the wider football game. And that's quite a difficult thing to do when you talk about our authorities, our kind of whole setup is built towards having those clubs, those authorities, having the central power. So this is why it's so important to have that independent oversight in it. For us, one of the reasons why Fair Game exists is because there were numerous times where a lot of the clubs from Fair Game would pick up the phone to the authorities or the government, moan about something, and the phone would be put down because they were just one club. They weren't on the board, they weren't making those decisions, they weren't really being listened to. So that's where we got to. So yes, I mean, in a way, I speak with a bit of vested interest, but I'm speaking on behalf of 34 clubs largely who would have not had been listened to in the past. So that's why we kind of need to look at, and that's why they're all of them are saying independence. They're not saying us, they're saying independent regulation, proper oversight, and that's where we kind of need to look at.
Now, later this year, David, we've got a general election. I mean, is it going to change again, do you think? I mean, where are we in terms of the politics of it all? I mean, we've already discussed that it's at the heart of everything that seems to be happening here. I mean, is there a concern that whatever is agreed now might just be thrown out the window if a new government comes into power?
Well, I doubt, by the very nature of the two parties, I doubt whether, if a bill was passed into an act by this government, I doubt that would be thrown out. I think, by definition, the Labour Party tends to be more interventionist, and therefore, I think our feel is there's more chance that if this bill didn't come into an act, there's more chance of a stronger bill and a stronger regulator under a Labour government, simply because they're less nervous about being seen to intervene than the Conservative government, which philosophically finds this quite difficult. It doesn't go in line with their natural instincts, I don't think. But how this is going to work out in this hugely confused political situation we have at the moment, who knows?
You've spent so many working years in and around football. How are you feeling right now? I mean, are you positive of a good outcome, or do you feel because of all that's happened in the past that actually it doesn't look good at all?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm pleased that we've got as far as we've got. I'm pleased there is a bill coming up which encompasses a regulator. That's a big step forward. I mean, can't downplay that. I mean, that was the central part of our thesis, that we needed this independence. But as I said, I'd be just very disappointed if we snatch defeat for the jaws of victory in a regulator not having the central powers that are needed. At the same time, I think this country and the world, but this country is in such a state of confusion now with its politics and with Parliament and with what's only going on, that maybe they're going to have great difficulty in focusing on this subject when there's so many other things of huge import going on at the same time, and the time for this government is getting potentially shorter and shorter. So I would like to bet how this is going to run out to this situation. But I'm pleased all in all. I'm quite sort of pleased where we've got to, but subject to this major point that we're discussing.
We're coming to the end now, but I just wanted to raise a sort of side story with you. I was reading over the weekend, the Premier League's auditors, Deloitte, they've been awarded a key contract in setting up the regulator. Now, is that not a potential conflict of interest?
Deloitte have been appointed the organisation to set up the kind of HR IT function of the regulator. And obviously, Deloitte are the Premier League auditors. So there's always going to be that tiny little bit of a red flag there. So if Deloitte are kept in that particular box, then I'm not going to say I'm delighted, but like at least it's kind of in that one area. If Deloitte were to ever, and I've had some guarantees over the last 24 hours that they're not going to be involved in policy advice, then that's kind of okay. But there's still an issue about an organisation such as them that have got such links in with the Premier League being so close to the regulator. And this goes back to we need to ensure at every step that we have that independence and that we're free from that kind of obvious vested interest that can exist. And that has to be really key. I think it's a little bit of a wake-up call again to the government to say, right, you have to kind of think about every club, all levels of the pyramid. And that's really important. You can't have an organisation that suddenly finds itself being run by people that are working so closely with the Premier League. That's got to be a nervousness that's out there.
Absolutely.
I've had some reassurances that isn't not to worry, but look, I'm a little bit worried. Of course,
yeah, and I think I'll just add to that. In our manifesto, that we open up by saying that the Premier League is a huge national asset. There's no question about that. So none of this is aimed at denigrating the Premier League. They've done a wonderful job, but their success has led to them having a huge level of what best called soft power, and that power, I think, is accentuated by the ownership of some of the particularly bigger clubs. When you've got nation states owning clubs, and they exercise power. They do it in all sorts of ways, and we just do not know what, if any, influence is quietly being exerted on government. If you do this, we'll do. That's the world of politics and so on. But I think one's innately nervous about the soft power and the strength that a Premier League can exert. We know that British Scudamore particularly was an excellent administrator. He was a very formidable. I dealt with Richard a lot. He was a very formidable person to deal with, and he certainly knew how to exercise the soft power of the Premier League very impressively. I've never criticised him for it. That was his job, and he did it really, really well. So behind all this is a certain unease about, because you might sort of say, well, why on earth would the government, having gone so far down this road in doing all this, why would they undermine the potential authority of the regulator that we work so hard to achieve? Why don't they go the whole hog and do the job properly? And then you wonder why. Who knows?
Yeah, an open question to end with and one to think on. David, Niall, thank you so much for your time. A fascinating conversation with inevitably more questions than answers. Now, if you've enjoyed it, do please subscribe to the Fair Game podcast. You can find it on all the usual channels. I'm Graham Miller. The producer is Ian Beach. Thank you for listening. And until the next edition of We Love You Football, it's goodbye for now.